What's that?
Clap harder.
I can't really clap harder. So there's this part of your brain called the amygdala. You may have heard before, it is the oldest and least evolved portion of your brain. It's about the size of an almond. Sometimes people call it the reptilian brain. It is responsible for hunger, anger, fear, and sexual reproduction. Most simply put, the amygdala is your survival instinct. And we owe a lot to the amygdala. We wouldn't be here if we didn't have one. Because way back when our ancestors lived in caves and they were walking through the woods and they encountered a bear, they didn't stop to logically assess the situation and the amount of danger they were in. They just booked it, right? Because the amygdala hijacks the brain, right? It is fight or flight. We are hardwired for that existence, so it ensured our survival. Pretty cool. It's actually the same thing, right, that when you notice a baseball coming at your head through the corner of your eye when somebody threw it at you when you weren't looking, that once you notice it, you suddenly kind of flinch. You kind of curl up into a little bit of balls. It's a survival mechanism. Unfortunately, today the amygdala does more harm than it does good because very rarely, if ever, are we presented with a situation that poses any kind of threat to our survival or the survival of our species, right? When was the last time you were really in grave physical danger? If you were, don't answer that, right? But this amygdala, right, because it wants you to survive, it wants you to be safe and secure and comfortable. It wants you to lead a life that is cozy and predictable. It does not like anything that is new or interesting, potentially dangerous or risky, right? That's why it is so difficult and we get so nervous when you ask a girl out on a date, or you're asking for a raise at work, or you're getting up in front of a group of people to give a presentation, right? Your amygdala doesn't want you to step outside of your comfort zone. It doesn't want you to feel vulnerable. The same thing that helped ensure our survival is kind of holding us back a little bit sometimes. But what if that amygdala isn't really the amygdala? And the amygdala is really a mythical sea creature from 19th century literature called a kraken, right? The kraken is this big sea monster with a bunch of tentacles that lives at the bottom of the sea and wants to kill people who are trying to traverse it. So it swoops up and it breaks the ship and brings everybody down to their death at the pit of the sea. I'm here to tell you that the kraken isn't so mythical, that the kraken is real, and the kraken exists in me, and exists in you, and every single one of us. And not only does the kraken not want us to lead a life, right, that is perhaps new and difficult and interesting and risky, the kraken doesn't really want us to be our truest selves, because it knows that in order to do all of those things, we have to be ourselves in the most severe form possible, not just as people, but in business. Okay, the kraken has 7 tentacles, and it's no coincidence that there are 7 blanks on this sheet of paper. As I say them, I want you to write them down, because this exercise is all about having the courage to be yourself. This exercise is about how to slay the kraken that's trying to hold you back. So you ready? The first tentacle, the fear of failure. The kraken wants you to be scared of failure, so it reminds you of all the people that might think of you differently once you fail. It warns you along the way. It wants you to think that failure is a bad thing. But what the kraken doesn't realize is that failure is actually okay, and that anybody who's ever done anything or attempted anything worth attempting has failed. And they know those failures only make them closer to success. And the people who might think less of you or criticize you for failing are only the people who have never done anything worth trying to begin with. So we know that failure is actually nothing to be afraid of. So we're not going to let the kraken make us fear it. So what are we going to do? We're going to bust out a freaking meat cleaver, and we're going to cut that tentacle right the heck off. Fear of failure, gone. Tentacle number 2, approval of others. The kraken wants you to think you need the approval of others, and of course this makes a little bit of sense because we are social creatures, right? We love almost nothing more than to be accepted by, loved, admired, adored, and validated by our peer groups, our friends, our family, our coworkers, our BNI chapter, right? And the kraken exploits this. The kraken wants you to think that there is no other way to be successful than through the approval of other people and every other people that you encounter. But what the kraken doesn't realize is that there are different worldviews. Just because your worldview differs from my worldview doesn't invalidate yours and validate mine, or vice versa. And that those worldviews can coexist. And that some of the most successful and revered people in our society are almost always the most polarizing people. Because you can't be all things to all people. You can't please everybody all the time. So although the approval of others is nice, it is not something that we absolutely need, right? So we can get past that. So what are we going to do? We're going to bust out our sword, our Excalibur, and we're going to cut that tentacle right off. We do not need the approval of others. Tentacle number 3, negative feedback. The Kraken wants to paralyze you with negative feedback because sometimes negative feedback is going to hurt your feelings, right? We believe that negative feedback is negative and bad, and yes, to a certain degree it is. And sometimes this feedback is feedback you solicit yourself, and sometimes it knocks up at your door without you even having to ask. And yes, there are things that you can learn from negative feedback, and sometimes negative feedback can be instructive. But again, going back to the idea of there being divergent worldviews, right? You can't be all things to all people. You can't please everybody. So that cup of coffee may be positive to some people and negative to other people. Who's right? Everybody's right, right? So just because you have negative feedback does not mean what you're doing is negative altogether. It does not mean it is not worthwhile. If anything, negative feedback is a sign that positive feedback exists elsewhere. Because it's been said that the risk of offense is the price of clarity, right? The opposite of love is not hate, it is indifference or apathy. So if you're doing anything that's pissing people off, that's a sign that you're doing something that other people are probably going to love just fine. So you don't need to right? Come on. Negative feedback is not as bad as you think. Cut that tentacle right off. The 4th tentacle, lying to yourself. The Kraken wants you to lie to yourself because it's a crutch, right? Oh, my beer bid isn't that bad. My customer service isn't that bad. I just happen to be in an industry where everybody hates all of us. So by comparison, it's okay. That's bullshit. There's actually a psychological term for this. It is called cognitive dissonance, right? It is easier to change the way you think about the behavior than to change the behavior itself, right? That's why we have these gut feelings and then we rationalize why it's okay, why we should eat that piece of cake or spend that money or do whatever, right? All it is making excuses for yourself. All it is lying to yourself. What the Kraken doesn't realize is that all of us know that yes, sometimes we're going to lie to ourselves because that's just part of being human, but we also know that when we lie to ourselves, we're also capable of knowing the truth. And we're also capable of telling ourselves the truth and not falling victim to that crutch, right? So we're not going to lie to ourselves. So what are we going to do? We're going to cut that mother of the tentacle right off. You with me? The 5th tentacle is laziness. Laziness kind of creeps up on you because most of us aren't lazy people in general, but we can be lazy at times. I think deep down everybody's a little bit lazy because nobody would want to do more work than they absolutely have to do, right? But laziness is tricky because it comes about in situations of insecurity, right? You would never, ever hesitate to assert yourself in a situation where success was inevitable, right? If you knew you were going to succeed, then of course you wouldn't be lazy. You would just go and do it. The tricky side is that there is no such thing as a situation of inevitable success. Save for ordering your coffee at Starbucks. Everybody knows how to do that. I know I'm going to go there and just crush it. I'm going to pay $190 for my tall dark roast, and that's it. I'm going to keep the receipt. Outside of that, though, there are a few situations where success is inevitable. But what we know is that whether or not we are sitting on our couches cracking a beer watching Netflix, or going out and creating some type of remarkable change, that time is going to pass anyways, right? So we might as well do it on something worthwhile. And that, going back again, failure is nothing to fear, so we will not be lazy. We will slice that tentacle right the heck off. The 6th tentacle is lack of self-awareness. Lack of self-awareness. The Kraken doesn't want you to be self-aware, because if you were self-aware, you would have more confidence. You would not be confused. diffuse. You know how to assert yourself in those situations. And if you're not self-aware, that's why we have things called friends and family and peer groups and networks, right? It's very hard to read the label from inside the bottle. So that's why we rely on other people. We influence other people and learn through their feedback and our interactions with them what type of awareness we should have for ourselves, right? How we're numbers. That's why we stick together and do things like this. The Kraken doesn't want us to come to these networking meetings and better ourselves, but we will, because we will not have a lack of self-awareness. We will cut that tentacle right off. Finally, the seventh and final tentacle, and I hope you left this for the bottom middle. Looking around, I think most of you did, because it's the most important one. It is, you're not good enough. That's the strongest tentacle most people fall victim to, you're not good enough tentacle, because the Kraken doesn't want you to think you're good enough, because it knows, deep down, every single one of us is a little insecure, maybe a lot insecure, no matter how much we try to project otherwise. When we try to do that all the time through the things we wear, the way we speak, the people we hang out with, the things we buy, whatever, we try to overcompensate for it. One of the things that I think is really important to remember, although this deeply held irrational insecurity is very easily exploited by the Kraken is forgetting one thing. The Kraken is forgetting that the only difference, the biggest difference between the people in this world who go out and do all the things, awesome things that they want to do, that they aspire to, and those that don't, is that the people who do simply see themselves as the type of people who do those things. We literally don't do anything. We don't stand up and give presentations or drive our cars or take sips of water that we don't see ourselves doing first. And there is actual neuroscience to back this up. So all you need to do is see yourself as the type of person that does those types of things, right? Basically like it's what people like us do mindset. And if you can't see it, I will tell you, you absolutely are good enough. Slice that tentacle right the heck off. Now, what is this all getting to, right? Why are we here? Why does this matter? How does this even relate to marketing? Well, we're all here, different people, different worldviews, representing different businesses with different styles and different preferences, but there is one thing that we all have in common, and that is, no matter what we are aspiring to, there's one thing we need to do to get there, and that is to do a better job influencing people. That's really the definition of marketing, right? To its simplest, right, least common denominator, marketing is about influencing people, and it manifests itself in a lot of ways, and this, of course, B&I, is one of them. Well, in order to influence people, you have to be persuasive. In order to be persuasive, you really got to be authentic. You can't really fake it. And when we're trying to be persuasive, oftentimes we think like, okay, we got to do something new, something funny, something really serious and professional, something big, something kitschy, something creative, right? What hasn't been done before? To that I say, first of all, that line of thinking is exactly where the Kraken wants you to go, because that's kind of like what everybody's thinking. What I say is, you haven't been done before. You as a person, your business hasn't been done before, especially in the way you run it, right? Your unique stamp you put on it, how it aligns with your worldview, and how it reflects the unique dent that you want to make in the world. If you can figure that out and wear your heart on your sleeve, the Kraken is no match for you. Because you will always be the best in the world at being yourself. All you got to do is slay the Kraken. Thanks.